I started diving into the ingredients that people tend to use on their skin every day and the impact on human and environmental health that those ingredients were having. And I was pretty shocked.
Okay, Dr. Sarah Villafranco, what a treat. Welcome to the Commune podcast.
Thank you.
Such an honor to host you here at our home and to have you here on the show. And your timing is propitious because, as we discussed last night over dinner, I've just returned from sort of the equivalent of a beauty pageant.
I think you called it Phthalate Fest last night, if I remember.
That's fair enough, because backstage there was enough concealer to cover Mount Vesuvius or so. And of course, I'm speaking of my daughter's dance competition, and there's many positive components.
It brought me to tears this morning watching it. Yeah.
But the reality of that backstage, it's essentially like a CVS.
Yeah. And
I am looking forward to, if nothing else, understanding what's in this sort of cityscape of bottles that litter my daughter's bathrooms and the backstage of these dance competitions. So I'm excited to dive into everything sort of natural beauty, the beauty industry at large, and maybe even just the nature of beauty and our concepts around aging, et cetera. But I think if you could scaffold our conversation a little bit with your journey, because you're an ER doctor. What are you doing in the world of natural beauty?
I ask myself that a lot. I ended up in the emergency room because I liked all of the different specialties in medical school. Like I think, peds, that was cool, but I don't want to do just peds. Or OB was amazing, but I definitely don't want to do just OB. And I got enough of those on my list that I thought, well, the ER is kind of great because you get to do a little of everything. You can always call in backup if you're like too deep in a situation, and you clock out, right?
Yeah.
And that was great for a while. After 10 years in the ER.
10 years in the ER.
Yeah.
God, that's another book.
Well, it's funny because people are always saying, oh, you must be so relieved to be out of that and, not be in the ER anymore. And my response is, so you just told me you don't own a business, right?
Yeah. You're talking about the acute trauma that is running a business.
Give me 12 hours of hell any day. I love many aspects of running a business, but the stress level to me is higher owning a business than it was in the emergency room.
Wow. That's saying something.
I'm sort of wired to do the ER. Like I'm one of those calm under pressure people. So I stuck with it for a while and enjoyed a lot of the work. Loved the people I worked with. Loved many of the patients. More and more started to see a pattern that I thought was going to be unhealthy for me in the long run, which was this feeling of fighting my own patients on their health. Right? And that was frustrating to me, where I was like, I don't want to work against you on your health. It's your health. Can we partner at least? So people coming in over and over for whatever it is, whether it's addiction or whether it's, bronchitis because they continue to smoke, or there were just these patterns where I thought, man, we have stripped people of their agency. We have made them dependent on us to provide health for them. And that doesn't work. And I found myself frustrated to the point where I thought, but you're just going to be a burnt out 60-year-old bitch if you keep on with this, you're going to get negative about humanity.
Yeah.
Right. So that was sort of in me a little bit. It was around the time when we were switching to the electronic medical record too. So that changed the practice of medicine a little bit. I'm definitely an eye contact, hands-on intuition physician. And I could feel this shift happening where I was spending 3 hours after every shift dictating charts to make sure that I'd covered every possible angle from which someone could sue me, And I found like more and more I have to be like entering information while I'm talking to people just in order to see all the patients I was trying to see. And the whole system just felt so terribly broken. So that was sort of like percolating in me. And then I had my second daughter, Nina, and then my mother died. And so she was a healthy 64-year-old who then developed pancreatic cancer. That's one of the ways that Casey and I connected, is that we're both from DC, both lost our moms to pancreatic cancer. So after she died, I was in this place of sort of the perfect storm of grief and postpartum hormones that made me want to turn my life upside down and shake it and see what fell out. And around that time, I signed up for a soap making class at a local ranch.
Yeah, something I might not be as apt to do, but sure, shake the snow globe and
see what happens. I saw it in the paper and I thought, that looks kind of cool. And, I had sort of come to think of myself as a non-creative, right? Mm-hmm. Like you're not in the ER like, Mr. Krasno, I'm going to give you 17 milligrams of Lasix today because that just feels good to me. It's not, it's a very prescriptive job. Yeah. And so I thought, let me just see if there is any creative spark to be stirred. And so I went to this soap making class with a friend of mine who was a veterinarian. And the two of us picked it up a lot more quickly than people who didn't have a science background. Soap making is kind of a cool blend of very, very precise chemistry and ultimately artistry, if you kind of work that in. But the chemistry piece came very quickly because I had so much of it in my background. And that day, I had this light switch thing happen in my brain where I knew that was something I wanted to do. But I was having a hard time figuring out how to go home to my husband and say, I'm not actually going to be a doctor anymore. I'm going to make soap.
Yeah, and I guess I would say beauty and cosmetics is relatively foreign for many men. Mm-hmm. And I'll put myself between those brackets. Yeah. I mean, I essentially have reduced myself to one single health and beauty aid as I divulged last night at the dinner table. This might be TMI for my regular listener, but I think I've washed my hair one time in the last 5 years.
Yeah.
And it's good enough.
Looks
right?
Great. Yeah.
And of course, men are not required to carry a suitcase full of cosmetics around with them to dance competitions or anywhere, because we are just not held to the same standards of beauty, right? So what is it here, maybe a little bit about culture, that demands certain things of women and doesn't demand the same things of men? And this is a way maybe to kind of back into the scale of this industry. I mean, I looked at it, I think this morning, it's something like $500 billion or something, right?
It's like beyond category, Yeah. It's so interesting because ultimately I did end up obviously leaving my practice in the ER. And part of the reason I left is because the industry felt so broken and so many things were wrong in it.
Yeah.
And I didn't, and I don't know what this says about my level of consideration or intelligence, but I didn't really figure out until recently that would land me in the beauty industry, which is as broken. And sure. I mean, there's so many things that are really pretty reprehensible about the beauty industry. And I never thought that I was going into it because I was always coming at it from this skin health angle.
Right.
And just let's get your skin healthy and let's get you feeling healthy in your skin, because when you do, you're going to feel beautiful, right? I mean, I really think that's true. And then there was also an aspect of just pulling in the most beautiful elements from nature that would make me want to just smell this, just smell, for the experience of smelling it, just smell it. It's so nice. But now I'm sort of not stuck. I'm in the beauty industry.
Yeah.
And I am a little teeny fish swimming against, not like a current, like a riptide. I'm just this tiny I consider myself a voice of reason, But there's a lot happening in the beauty industry that's terribly upsetting if you think about it too much.
Yeah. So just to create a little more context, so it was 12 years ago you started Osmia, is that correct? Mm-hmm. And your focus has been on natural skincare. So for people that actually aren't familiar with what skincare actually encompasses, can you kind of untangle that a tiny bit?
Yeah, I mean, I started with that soap making class.
Yeah.
And at first I was just sort of taken with the chemistry of it. Then I started using this bar of soap that I'd made in my class.
Yeah.
And I live in Colorado where it's about 26% humidity. And for the first time in years, my skin felt not itchy. And which is funny because soap sort of has a reputation as being drying. And a lot of the bigger commercial soap companies either take out the good stuff or put in bad stuff that make it drying. But this sort of artisanal method of making soap retains all this glycerin, which is really softening for your skin. So that was the first thing I noticed is like, my skin feels great. And then, and this sort of goes back to the transition period of my life, I started diving into the ingredients that people tend to use on their skin every day and the impact on human and environmental health that those ingredients were having. And I was pretty shocked. Mm-hmm. And ultimately that piece is what allowed me to justify leaving a career in emergency medicine and starting a skincare company, because I knew, like, both from a human health and an environmental health standpoint, I could try to make things better, at least for the people who are buying our products.
Yeah. So was your focus, obviously there's soaps that you started with, but then, and this is where you really need to educate me, but there's like moisturizers and concealers and cleansers, right? So
you're doing such a good job. I'm proud of you. So
this is by osmosis here.
So concealers.
There's no Y chromosomes in my household.
So my husband's in the same position. We have 3 women in the family and 3 female dogs. So he's with you. So concealer is sort of more in the makeup category, and we don't do any makeup. So there's sort of like hair care, skincare, and makeup, I would say, are sort of the 3 big ones. Yep. In terms of personal care, then there's household stuff like your laundry detergent and the stuff you spray on your counters and the hand soap in your bathroom, right? Mm-hmm. So those are all of the areas in which some of these offenders that we'll talk about at some point make appearances. For us, I did soap, and at the time was dealing with a skin condition called perioral dermatitis. So perioral means around the mouth. Dermatitis means angry skin. Yes. Right?
I think I've been witness to
that phenomenon. It's like angry looking red skin. It sort of looks like eczema and acne had a baby on your face a little bit. And it's a very frustrating skin condition, and it's ubiquitous. And I had it. And one of the soaps I made, our black clay facial soap, which is now our best-selling product, really made a difference. And I had been trying everything from straight conventional medicine to putting like powdered sugar and olive oil on my face at 3:00 in the morning with tears streaming. It's just like you kind of lose a little perspective. Yeah. So I saw that make a difference. And then I thought, okay, well, I need to do all the other things now. I can't have figured out all of these good, healthy ingredients to use in the soap department and then go back to putting these other ingredients on in all the other categories. So then I developed, a lot oils, which are pretty easy to make, not necessarily to make well, but easy enough to make. And then emulsions were sort of like the tricky part. I'm not a cosmetic chemist, and I didn't go to cosmetic chemistry school. I had a Vitamix that I started with and kind of moved from there.
These smoothies.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, that's an emulsion. Yeah. And so then now we really have a kind of a head to toe line of skincare products.
Got it. And so how would you delineate between the ingredients in your products versus the ingredients in what might be referred to as sort of big beauty?
Yeah.
So and I don't know, what are the big players? So it's like L'Oreal and Unilever and Procter & Gamble. And,
Yeah,
those guys.
that's right.
Yeah.
The personal care industry, basically. And there are a ton of brands, and some of them are sort of bigger offenders than others, and some of them are trying to make strides, right, in a big company kind of way,
Yeah.
right. But I think the main thing. So when I started the brand, I went through and tried to pick out, okay, what are the categories of ingredients that I think have enough question marks around them.
Right.
And I say that because there was no definitive proof of anything, right? And if there was, I didn't even really consider using it. Like, there's some chemicals that could have gone into skincare 50 years ago that I just was like, they're not even on the list. But the categories that I ended up choosing were categories I chose either because I saw enough question marks around human health or environmental health. Right. So including things like parabens, phthalates, petrochemicals, ethoxylates, which is a huge category and one that most people don't know about, synthetic fragrance, synthetic color. Those are the types of things that we ended up just leaving out because I felt like there was enough evidence.
And does this industry fall under FDA regulation, or is it another regulatory agency?
So it's pretty unregulated.
So if you're trying to be a conscious consumer,
Yeah.
and there's of course every reason to be, are ingredient labels mandated on cosmetics? And
Yeah, so it depends on what it is. So for a soap, I don't have to put any ingredients on my soap as long as I just call it soap. As soon as I call it anything like it's an exfoliating bar or a moisturizing soap, then I have to list my ingredients. And yes, they are. It is FDA. It's under their like
general aegis.
general roof, but like they're not looking. I mean, they are, but they're not. I mean, the regulation is loosey goosey. There's nothing defining what natural or clean means. And I can tell you that most brands that say they are clean just aren't. At least not by a standard that makes sense to me from the research that I've done.
Yeah. Because what I'm trying to back into here slowly is, if you're a consumer,
You're screwed.
That's
the answer.
I mean,
Yeah.
So there's no way to walk into Sephora and pick something up and actually look at an ingredient list and be like, no, I don't think so. I mean,
All right,
what should you be looking at?
It's really hard. It's really, really hard as a consumer. There are a few apps you can use. The EWG, the Environmental Working Group, has one. There's one called Think Dirty. There's another one called Yuba, or I'm going to say that wrong, but it's a Y word. But there are a few of them where you can go and actually scan a product and it will pop up for you with a rating, right? The downside to that is it really depends on the app's rating system, right? So to give an example, the EWG, which helped me a lot when I was looking at ingredients in the early days, trying to decide what my sort of cutoffs were for toxicity and where it mattered. But take our black clay facial soap, for example. My guess is that on an EWG app, it would have a high score, which is bad. So high is bad, low is good. Like green, 1, 2, 3 is good. Then yellow, 4, 5, 6, and then above that is red. Okay. So our black clay facial soap could have a high score there because the powdered black clay that goes into it, if you were to inhale it as a loose powder, could be damaging to your lungs. But that's not really relevant when it's incorporated into a soap and there's no possibility of there being a loose powder, right? And there are a lot of examples like that where only by being absurdly educated on this could you make an informed decision.
Well, that's what we're here to do. We're here to absurdly educate. That should be the tagline of the podcast,
Absolutely.
really. Okay, so then, I mean, are there these sort of constellations of misaligned incentives here within this industry, kind of similar to those that exist, with big pharma, for example? So where a clinician, a doctor, is getting invited to conferences and getting samples and incentivized in all sorts of different ways to essentially prescribe certain pharmaceuticals. Is that sort of analogy like carry over into dermatology and the cosmetics industry, et cetera?
Yeah, it does. And it's super frustrating. I find myself essentially having to undo a lot of what dermatology has done for patients. And that's not to say there aren't some, super skilled and wonderful dermatologists out there, but they are getting samples, thousands and thousands and thousands of free samples from the big personal care companies that, that's helpful to them because they've got 15 minutes with a patient and they need to give them some samples of something to try. A lot of the samples are relatively inert from like a skin perspective. Like this probably isn't going to irritate your skin, right? And then, they just aren't interested in learning more about natural ingredients or are even inclined to think that natural ingredients are harmful because they just don't know enough about them. And there's nobody, like Osmia is not funding huge studies that would be compelling to dermatologists. There aren't any like really solidly clean brands that have the kind of money that's needed to move the needle in that department.
Yeah.
So it's, there's all these like TikTok dermatologists who are, like board certified dermatologist here, and here are the things I would never use, or, and they'll kind of go off on natural products. And I get it. I mean, there was a time when a natural skincare product came wrapped in burlap and smelled like patchouli, right? Like you remember this time,
Yeah.
right? But it's come a long way. And there are some sophisticated skincare products made by people who have the right level of education. Essential oils can be super harmful, just like your pod the other day with somebody where you talk about the dose, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if you drink this much lavender essential oil, it's toxic,
Right.
right? So you have to use these things well. And so, dermatologists will kind of say like essential oils are bad. And I'm like, well, it depends on how you use them. And in some cases, you're totally right. They are bad and they can cause all kinds of rashes and all kinds of other problems. But used skillfully, they can also be medicine. So I don't really know how to, I think it's the kind of thing where I'm not sure dermatology and I will ever see eye to eye on this. I have one dermatologist friend from medical school who, I got back in touch with recently, and he said, send me some of your products. And I did. And, I kind of forgot about it. And like a month later, he texted me and he said, what is this black magic? And he actually now is a total fan and prescribes on his prescription pad our black clay facial soap and our face cream for dermatitis patients.
Wow.
So, I mean,
then if you could get insurance to actually cover that would be the next.
That would be, because our stuff is expensive. Yeah.
Well, of course it has to be.
It has to be.
So you mentioned kind of a panoply of ingredients. I think there's some exposure or awareness, I guess I should say, to like parabens and phthalates. So maybe we start there. Like, parabens, like what? What is it? Why is it used?
I know.
And what are some of the knock-on impacts of the use?
Yeah. So parabens are very, very effective preservatives. So you put preservatives in any cosmetic that has a water-soluble phase, right? Because that's where bacteria and mold like to fester, right? So you have to preserve them. And this is like a peeve of mine when you have brands who are, it's like a red flag for me as far as being well full of shit is the way I would say it. The no preservatives is like a red flag for me because it's a marketing play. And the fact is you want your skincare to be preserved just safely.
Right.
Right. So it's like a marketing play, like eco-friendly packaging is another one that's like a red flag for me.
Yeah.
I'm like, the only eco-friendly packaging is like pull an apple off a tree like that. There isn't eco-friendly.
It's like no sugar added
Right.
for wine or something like that.
Right.
Because, so with parabens, so there's a good reason on some level to
Absolutely.
to preserve,
Yeah.
because otherwise anything that would be water, that would have some water content,
Yeah.
could develop molds and bacteria, and that could be dangerous.
Absolutely.
But
when I was trying to decide about preservation in the early days, there were, like I said, there were enough question marks around parabens. When I went back in the last couple of weeks to do another deep dive on PubMed, like where you just spend 2 days and your eyes are fatigued, and you've been there, right?
And your partner's like, "What are you doing?
Right.
Come to bed, God damn it!"
No, yeah. I found more than 2,000 studies done in the last decade.
Wow.
About parabens, and like it's just the evidence is just it's there, and it isn't. Like none of it is conclusive, right? There really aren't a bunch of randomized, double-blind, controlled studies on the topic. But at some point, you gather enough not totally conclusive evidence to say that the body of evidence itself becomes conclusive, right? And so the deal with them is that they are endocrine disruptors. They go in and interact with estrogen receptors in our bodies. And they cause trouble in a lot of different ways. So studies showing that women with higher detectable levels of parabens in their urine have shorter menstrual cycles, right? Not that big a deal, shorter by, 2 days. But if you're looking at a 72-hour window of fertility, and you just lopped a few hours off of that, ultimately, that's like not a trend we want to consider or we want to continue.
Sure. Yeah.
So similarly, mothers who had higher levels of parabens detectable in their urine or their cord blood had babies who were born earlier and had lower birth weights.
So if you are a pregnant mother and you are applying sort of conventional products that have parabens, that's going to cross the placenta.
Yes.
Okay. And then essentially your unborn child is sort of inheriting whatever endocrine disrupting, properties.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when, there was a big article in the New York Times not long ago that said something like girls are getting their periods when they're 9 and we don't know why. And the comments section was like a Wild West rodeo.
Yeah.
So people were very focused on food, that all of the hormone disrupting things that we get in our food, right, are having a huge impact on the evolution of this.
Yeah, I have a theory about that too. But
You do? I'm interested to hear what your theory about it is.
I mean, I don't want to derail us. I think there's a constellation of contributing causes.
Yeah.
I do think that diet plays a big role because essentially what cannot be argued with is that we're seeing kind of cresting rates of obesity in children, and they're essentially the production of like leptin, for example, which is a hormone that is kind of known as the satiety hormone, but really it's actually the enough hormone.
Yeah.
So that is like produced within fat cells.
Right.
And it sends a message to your brain, not just that, oh, I've had enough, don't feed me anymore. It's just I have enough stored energy in the form of fat to undertake big physical challenges, including childbirth. So now I am ready at age 8, age 9, and that's triggering a hormonal cascade of FSH and all the other things to essentially drive early menarche. Now, I think that is a completely reasonable theory, and it follows. And I think there's other contributing factors.
Yeah, I think that's the constellation is exactly right, and I think we can't discount the things we're using on our skin every day and the things that we were exposed to in utero, right? Because when we think about like our moms, what they were using, like parabens were in absolutely everything back then, right? And that's like another like data point for me. When I went on the, I took a screenshot of it. Let me look and tell you what this says because I was so impressed. Current FDA website says, and you can, I'm going to read the parabens statement. You can replace it with the word phthalates for the phthalate statement.
Got it.
At this time, we do not have information showing that parabens, as they are used in cosmetics, have an effect on human health. Okay. That bothers me a lot because it's just a total denial of a huge body of evidence. But the thing that's also compelling to me is that when I was starting Osmia, I went through and made a list of like a lot of products that contained parabens made by the sort of conventional beauty companies. And I used that in various talks and stuff that I would do, like, hey, you might think this was a clean brand based on the marketing, but actually, look, it's got all these parabens, right? When I went back and looked those products up in the last few weeks, they've all been reformulated. And these big companies are not going to reformulate unless there's a problem. And now you could argue that it's just because it's gotten non-trendy to use parabens that they do it, but I think that they know, it's coming.
Yeah, like the FDA hasn't raised the flag publicly yet.
Right.
But potentially, privately, the word is out.
Yeah, they're like, we should.
Yeah, well, they didn't, with phthalates, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe the use was limited, by an agency. I don't think, it might not be the FDA, but because it was found in sort of plastics in toys, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't use them to make children's toys anymore, but it seems like putting them in skincare is just fine.
Yeah, and it's not just skincare. And so that's the trouble with both parabens and phthalates in some ways, is that there's this accumulation of products throughout your day. So you've got your laundry detergent that has synthetic fragrance, which is rich in phthalates. You've got your, shampoo and conditioner, which likely also have synthetic fragrance. Synthetic fragrance is in everything you use unless you tried not to have it in there, right? You have your, all your skincare products that you put on. You have your hand soap at the sink. I mean, it's just the number of ways in which you're making contact with parabens and phthalates throughout your day is pretty staggering. Yeah. And that does have this sort of, cumulative effect. Yeah.
So parabens was for a preservative process, but phthalates, if my understanding is correct, it has more to do with fragrance. Is that right?
Yeah. So the high molecular weight phthalates are the ones that are used to make plastic flexible. We all, as human beings in civilization, have detectable phthalates in our urine. It's just unfortunately true, right? But like you think about the medical industry and like IV tubing, right? That's anything that makes plastic flexy, that is like a high molecular weight phthalate. The low molecular weight phthalates are the things that are used as stabilizers and fragrance extenders. And that's the reason why someone wearing Tide laundry detergent, walks through your house and 3 hours later you can still smell it. Yeah. Right? I think of it almost like as the difference between a contrail and a chemtrail, right? Like when you wear essential oils, they too contain some volatile organic compounds, but they evaporate very quickly. So it's like this contrail. It's like this, you might smell a whiff of vetiver as I walk by in your house. Yeah. And
God, lovely.
But
Sarah's
it's gone quickly. Yeah.
But she's fleeting.
Exactly. Yeah. But if you are wearing a synthetic scent, it will linger like a chemtrail for hours and hours and hours.
Yeah. So I had to chauffeur like a overflowing clown car of girls back from this dance comp.
Yeah.
And my car, even last night, I was like, oh my God. Yeah. It's still here.
It's still
Get
there.
It out.
Thanks, phthalates.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
They do a good job. Yep.
Phthalate fest indeed.
Yeah. I mean, I think so for me, the more concerning health piece about phthalates is their connection, especially when you get exposed to them in utero, to the development of a host of mental health problems, from from ADHD to depression to anxiety. So again, you think about all the synthetic fragrance that the generations before us have been using, and this wave of mental health problems in our young people.
Yeah. So this goes beyond disruption of the estrogen receptor, basically.
It does.
This is permeating a lot of different systems of the
Exactly.
body.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously you said, I'm not going to do that.
Right. Right. It was a pretty easy call.
And so then how do you accomplish some of the same goals of fragrance and of shelf-stable preservation or whatever without using them?
It's tricky, right? So like when I was in my Vitamix mode, I used a few natural preservatives that, were available at the time, and our face cream had a shelf life of 6 months because that's all we felt comfortable with based on the preservation. Ultimately, for our emulsions, I ended up, consulting with cosmetic chemists like, hey guys, I got this to a point. Help me get it over the line. So now we're at a 2-year shelf life on our emulsions, thanks to natural preservatives. Now, are they natural like they grew in the garden? No, they're not. They are made in a laboratory, but they are naturally derived and don't contain any of our list of no ingredients. As far as scent goes, there are certain essential oils that have a lower volatility, meaning they tend to hang. Like vetiver is a really good example. That one hangs on, or vanilla hangs for a long time. Something like orange, I consider that to be like sort of the cleavage of the olfactory world. Like it's very enticing, but it's, it's gone pretty quickly. And so
like cleavage,
like cleavage,
okay.
yeah. So I think that it just depends on what you're using, but the expectation needs to be calibrated. Like I just tell people, it's a natural scent. It's not going to last, 24 hours. Nothing in nature lasts. Even a rose, smells different in the morning than it does in the heat of the day. It's going to shift. It's going to evolve. It's going to change, and it's going to fade. Deal with it.
Yeah. Everything fades.
It does.
I think osmia, kind of in the dictionary, is sort of the diminishing sense of smell, right?
Anosmia is the inability to smell. Yep. And there isn't a word osmia in the dictionary.
Really? Oh, okay.
It's a genus of bee. But other than that, there's anosmia, there's parosmia. You can have an altered sense of smell when you have certain brain tumors, for example. You can have hyperosmia, which we all have when we're pregnant. You can smell things from a mile away, or you have smell intolerance because your smell receptors are so jazzed.
Right.
So I kind of took it to mean a sense of smell, and also just a reminder to slow down and sense your life. I have like a memory of my mom. She was a lawyer in a Washington, D.C. law firm, and super, super busy. It was at a time when there were no exceptions made for women partners. And I have this memory of her applying her facial oils and watching her physically slow down to inhale them and to just have this moment, and that really stuck with me, that was just this really special moment of her day where she allowed herself just to be and to smell and to feel the texture of these oils going on her skin. And so I wanted to weave that moment into our name.
Yeah. I mean, the olfactory is an underappreciated scent.
It's actually just right? It's the coolest possible thing, right? So it's the only one of our 12 cranial nerves that's connected directly to the external environment. So inside your head, in like a plane here, there's something called the cribriform plate, and the nerve endings of your olfactory nerve kind of stick down through it. And that's where scent molecules bind with those. Yeah. And so they're actually contacting our external environment, which none of the other cranial nerves do. And then they take this like express highway into the limbic system, which is the home of memory and emotion. So that's why you can kind of walk into a place and have this feeling of nostalgia or sadness or joy before you figure out, oh, there's a cedar trunk in the corner, and that's like hitting me, and it reminds me of my grandmother, because it's too fast for you to keep up with.
Yeah. Yeah. Certainly, like if your childhood home, right, has a scent, has a kind of a nostalgia for a lot of people that's held within the olfactory. But it seems like like it needs a better PR agent as a sense,
Absolutely.
right? Because it's also very much tied to our enjoyment of food, for example.
Yeah.
I don't think, can you even have taste without
A little
bit?
Yeah.
And of course, it sort of creamed to the top during COVID somewhat, because there was this phenomenon where people were losing their sense of smell, and then by extension their ability to taste things, right?
Yeah, and they sort of realized what a big role the sense of smell plays in your everyday. I mean, it goes back, it's all the lizard brain stuff too. I'm sure it factors into our feeling of safety and or risk. Your sense of smell is constantly perceiving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. So interesting. Yeah. I want to go back to just the application of skincare and why people feel so compelled to use, a variety of products. I mean, I'm 53. I know you're proudly 50. We seem to be doing like fairly well in the wrinkles department, but there's this, we're sort of hell bent on kind of concealing like who we really are, for some to meet some standard of beauty, kind of attainable or not, and then that feeds our compulsion to use these products, and then that feeds like the whole industry, et cetera. So what would you suggest for people that are starting to be in sort of middle age, as wrinkles, wisdom lines, whatever you want to call them, are showing up? Like, what is a healthy approach to that inevitability?
That has a lot of tentacles.
Sure. Pull on one or three.
I mean, I think for me, what I want to do is ask people to take a step back and examine their reason for doing a thing, right? Because I think a lot of our practices are rooted in fear and shame, and with a hefty sprinkle of patriarchy, right? And they're, all beauty marketing is designed to tap into our insecurity and our fear. And so, I want people to back up a little. And so the example that I think of in my own life is the day that I think I was at about 38 years old, and I was at the hairdresser, and she looked at me sort of conspiratorially in the mirror and said, "Do you want me to cover up these gray hairs?" And I felt like my pants were down or something. Like I felt mortified that I had, I mean, and I don't think she meant anything bad by it. That's just what she knew most women wanted. Mm-hmm. But it would have been so different if she had said, "Hey, I see some silver hair coming in. What do you think you want to do? Do you want to go salt and pepper? Or are you thinking you want to cover them up?" It just wasn't ever presented as like an equally viable option to not color my hair. So I did for 6 years. And then, just shy of my 44th birthday, had that moment that a lot of, women are having, where I looked in the mirror and saw the gray coming in and thought, I was just there 3 weeks ago. I don't want to keep, it's $300 a pop and it's 3 hours. I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And that was another light switch. And I'm just like, oh, I'm done. And, and so I think there's just a lot of that is, I don't think there's this like bright line between things that are rooted in self-love and things that are rooted in self-loathing. Because if there were a bright line, it would be much easier not to cross it. I think it's this zone, this long fade, where we do things that initially feel maybe like they're rooted in self-love, but ultimately like end up being rooted in this horrible criticism of ourselves for what? For just, time has an effect on us.
Yeah.
And I think it's become this terribly unhealthy culture where, the 25-year-olds are starting with Botox now. And again, like I'm not trying to judge. I'm just trying to be careful about what we normalize, what becomes the expectation and why. And so with regard to how to approach it as an aging person, which by the way, all of us are, right? Like, I think you just want to step back and say, what do I want my path to look like here? Do I want to live in fear of this so much? Because it feels to me like telling someone that like oxygen is toxic, because like that's what we're all doing every day is aging.
Yeah.
And we've created this toxicity around it.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of contributing factors there. I think Ram Dass used to say, a leaf turns red in the fall. Do we criticize it? No, we go and we celebrate it. And we drive to Vermont or whatever. But now, the way that we see our elders, for example, we don't actually see them as elders. They used to be these like incredible fonts of wisdom with accumulated experience. Where we go. We created this kind of God figure that's like an old man, or Lao Tzu or Confucius or whatever. There are all these like older people that we're supposed to look to for wisdom, but now they've become the elderly. So we ship them off because they're generally sick and often a nuisance. And so that old Lao Tzu, this is apocryphal probably, but the fact that it's even in the myth is interesting enough. It's always said that he was born with his long white beard. He was that wise.
God, that makes me think of a Will Ferrell skit from Saturday Night Live.
So, these properties or these characteristics, I might say that, were endemic to being older are no longer, celebrated or popular in our culture. And, I don't know what necessarily the source of wrinkles are, but it's like probably like collagen breakdown and elastin breakdown.
You're on track. Yeah.
Lack
That's
of,
right.
Subcutaneous fat over time or something. And probably a lot of scowling.
And laughing.
Right. Right. So, we can sort of, accept that within, certain parameters, or, fight it. And it seems like fighting it never really, leads anywhere profitable. You unpacked the nature of Botox to me last night, which was a complete revelation to me because I'd never thought about it as a acronym or anything. It's not exactly an acronym, but
it's a shortening of botulinum toxin, which is a toxin created by bacteria as a defense mechanism. And so it was, found to be useful in a variety of conditions and is still, right? So like people who have hyperhidrosis, like a uncontrollable sweating of their palms, for example, you can use Botox to sort of paralyze the nerves that cause sweating. So there's a bunch of medical uses for Botox other than the cosmetic uses. But I have a theory, and just to be clear, this is a theory, that the sort of full face Botox starting at a young age is not going to work out well. And the reason is that Botox is a paralytic agent. And so it paralyzes your facial muscles. And what happens to a paralyzed muscle? Atrophy.
Yeah.
Right? So you lose volume under your skin over time with enough Botox. And what is the solution to losing volume under your skin?
Filling it with
something else, right? And so, my approach has been to keep using my facial muscles to keep them healthy and strong. And my choice, which is a conscious choice by me, is to not intervene, at least at this point in my life. I'm only 50, so I don't know. At 62, I could feel different about it. But I sort of feel, as a mother of 2 daughters, that part of my responsibility in sort of walking the walk is to lead by example, right? Like, to me, that's the most meaningful way of leading, is to lead by doing. And if I want beauty culture to change for them, then I need to at least normalize the option of doing less, right? And your wife is an amazing example of someone who's chosen to do less and is no less stunning as a result. Right? I see a woman like
subjective comment, but
it is, but I see a woman like Skylar, and
Yeah.
I just I'm like, thank you. Like, thanks for having whatever it is that allows you just to be, And people, that's one of my favorite lines is just, people say people letting yourself go when you stop coloring your hair, or you stop this or stop that. But I think it's just more letting yourself be. And I just want to give more women permission to do that. I think that it's a big fight, and like I said, it's not this bright line. I put on mascara to come sit here with you. Right? I know it's very subtle.
Very subtle.
But, we all have, we're humans, and vanity is part of that.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Yeah. And we've been painting our faces in some form or another. I recently looked at obviously there's indigenous cultures that have that have used kind of adornments and for spiritual purposes and just to be.
Or birds, for that matter, who have these unbelievable plumage dances that they're,
yeah,
it is part of nature.
Yeah. It is a thing.
Yeah.
Certainly in the human species, I don't know, Botticelli sitting there painting Venus to be like, oh, put a little more cadmium white under her eyes. She got a bad night's sleep last night. And then juxtaposed with you don't even have to have an ear to be a male portrait or whatever. But
that was a fun journey.
Yeah. But then the point is that, yes, we've been doing a lot over, the history of our human species to adorn ourselves. And at the same time, there has been, a lot that men essentially have set the standards for what is considered beautiful. And those standards are often completely unfair and in many cases unattainable. And in many cases, women are playing within those same parameters of beauty standard. And I look at my daughters, for example, and they are, essentially complying. It's not really the best word, but I'll just move on because I think you know where I'm getting to kind of these standards that they didn't set, but they still feel like they need to fit within.
Totally. And that's the insidious nature of it, right? And that's why it's important, at least to me personally, to lead by example by doing less, right? Because there's a lot of kvetching about the double standard for men and women. Why are men allowed to have salt and pepper and have crow's feet and that's sexy, right? Mm-hmm. But part of the reason women aren't allowed to is because they continue to make the appointments to get their hair colored and to get the Botox. And again, I'm not here to judge it. because I think it's such a personal thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just here to ask people to examine it. Just why are you doing it? And did you actually sign up for it? Right? I mean, when I stopped coloring my hair, I was like, wait, let me sit down and think about it. Let me do the pros and cons. And I started with the question, why are you coloring your hair? And I was like, crickets. I actually have no idea why I'm doing this.
Right.
Why am I covering up my gray hair? Why? I never stopped to ask why. And I think that's the slippery slopiness of this, where you just start doing it because your dermatologist suggested it or your friends are doing it or whatever it is, and it just becomes normal. And we never stop and say, wait, do I actually want to spend the next 30 years coloring my hair or injecting my face? And we talked a little bit about, this last night, where the farther you get from your baseline, the harder it is to see yourself and the ways in which you've changed.
Yeah.
And then, there's a sort of subset of people who kind of end up looking a lot alike because they have the same, dermatologist or plastic surgeon, or they have, they've all had similar procedures done. And, I personally think one of the most, and can you see those pictures, like these black and white photographs, kind of, I can't remember who the photographer is, but it's like the Ansel Adams of people, who has all these pictures of these beautiful Himalayan or Tibetan people who live in the mountains and just have these faces full of wrinkles and character and breathtaking beauty. Yeah. I mean, one of my eyes doesn't open as wide as the other, and that makes my face unique.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, it is that slight asymmetry that I think we are actually attracted to.
Right.
Yeah. No, that's super interesting. And you mentioned exercising your face muscles as sort of a natural preservative. I know that you push a lot of weight generally in the gym, and you seem to have won the admiration of my local trainer here in Los Angeles. Yeah. Are there things that you actually actively do with your face, or is that just sort of
no? And there's a lot of misinformation about it. I mean, there's a lot of trending stuff out there. Like there's something called gua sha or gua sa. Well, like it's a stone tool that you use, and it's a lymphatic massage thing. And certainly there are ways to use those things that can make you look a little bit more plumped or refreshed. The lymphatic drainage thing, sure, maybe it helps a little bit with lymphatic drainage, but I think that just the promises are just overblown, right? And we're just on this hamster wheel where we are just buying more and more products that promise to do all of these things, but somehow ultimately make us feel worse about ourselves. Yeah. Right. And so, I mean, the fact is, if there were like a dark circle under eye cream that worked, like we would know about it. We would know. And there's some stuff that works, right? Like Retin-A or, retinoids as a broad category, those work to help reduce fine lines. They work to help diminish the look of sunspots that you've gotten from many years of exposure to UV light. Vitamin C serums can have, a brightening effect on your skin. There are a few categories of things that maybe should be part of your routine if trying to help your skin look as healthy as possible as you age is a priority for you. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that the vast majority of products are making promises that they can't keep.
Mm-hmm. Mm. So if you're a conscious human and you're trying to actually be conscious about behavior that is subconscious, which I think is what you're asking people to do in many ways. To ask the question, what has become a subconscious habit here in my life? So as you become kind of more of a conscious human being and conscious consumer, what are the things to look for, and how does that dovetail with Osmia and your products and your ingredients?
Well, I would say like there's sort of two sides to it. So there's the consciousness around why am I doing this? And then there's the consciousness around ingredient and ingredient safety, right? So, I think as far as let's do the ingredient safety piece first. I mean, you can certainly download one of those apps I talked about. I think the most important thing is probably finding brands you trust, right? So you find brands that seem to be, and this can be tricky in itself because there's a lot of marketing and there's a lot of greenwashing, but brands that are really trying to do good things in the world and to be better about the ingredients they're using. And have, I find that companies that have sort of passionate founders, of which I consider myself one, tend to be a good way to lean. The other thing I look for is transparency, right? So like if you're on a brand's website and they don't have a full ingredient list, for example, that's a problem. Mm-hmm. Why? So I think that transparency and authenticity in brands is something to look for. I think as far as like how to develop a routine and what is that routine based in, I start with skin health. Is my skin healthy, right? And the answer is often no. There's a lot of people who are struggling with a lot of different skin conditions. And that's a great goal, is just let's get my skin doing its job really well. My skin is here to keep the bad stuff out and the good stuff in. How can I support it in its job, right? And I think I always like to remind people, your skin is never doing something to you. It's always doing something for you. Even when it's misbehaving, it's putting up a flag. Hey, I need help. Mm-hmm. You need to help me figure out a better way here. So that's another, one of the ingredients we skip is the category called sulfates.
Right.
And there's an ingredient called sodium lauryl or sodium lauryl sulfate that's in just about everything that foams, except for natural bar soap. But it's in your body wash, it's in your shampoo, it's in your laundry detergent, it's in your hand soap, it's in everything. And it's a low-grade irritant. And so a lot of people who are struggling with something like eczema or dermatitis are struggling because they have this everyday exposure to SLS. Mm. And just getting rid of SLS can be curative in some ways, So this very, and you're getting prescriptions from your dermatologist who's not telling you to stop using SLS, by the way. You're getting steroids, which will fix your problem until they make it come back with a vengeance when you try to stop. So the whole system is it's this terrible cycle where we're not just sort of again, this is the problem in medicine too, we're not looking at root causes, right? Yeah. So I think that when you're creating a routine for yourself, the first is how can I help my skin be its healthiest, right? And then where do I want to draw the line for myself? Is it I heard a podcast with somebody recently who said, I draw the line at pain. I'm not going to undergo pain to look pretty. Right? So this is a person who's not going to get needles and not going to get plastic surgery, but maybe she'll use a vitamin C serum or retinoid because, okay, that's not painful. All right, so you just have to figure out what are your standards for where do I draw this line? And keep in mind, especially if you're 23, you got a long way to go. Right? It's a lot of time and a lot of energy and a lot of money. For me, I think let's let skincare be an enjoyable part of our day. It should be enjoyable. And that's one thing I don't love about some of the big personal care companies is they're just so inert. Mm-hmm. It's but let this bring me joy. We don't have enough joy in our daily moments. Let's infuse them and smell something beautiful or feel something beautiful. And let's allow our skin to be healthy and let's get on with our lives. Can we just keep it in perspective here? Yeah. And now let's go on to do the things we're meant to do.
Do you have a point of view on sunscreen?
I'm for it.
Okay.
But I'm for the mineral sunscreens. So there are only 2 sunscreen ingredients that protect against both UVA and UVB rays. UVA being the rays that age you, UVB being the rays that burn you, right? Zinc oxide is one of them, and that's a mineral sunscreen, and avobenzone is the other one, which is a chemical sunscreen. Avobenzone doesn't have a bunch of icky data about it as an endocrine disruptor yet, but I think it's coming. Its cousin oxybenzone does. So I like a zinc oxide sunscreen. And I wear sunscreen every day for the most part. I live in the mountains of Colorado. I live at 7,000 feet. So I'm outdoors a ton, and I definitely take wearing sunscreen seriously. I also think it's fine to get, 20 minutes of sun on your skin in the morning or the evening for some healthy vitamin D action.
Okay. What about just some basics around hair care?
Hair care is a hiding place for a lot of ingredients that I choose not to use, either for health reasons or for environmental reasons. So a lot of hair care brands have SLS as the main foaming agent. The vast majority of hair care brands have synthetic fragrance, which will be listed either as fragrance or the word parfum, PARFUM, which is a product that's actually part preservative and part fragrance. The trouble with those words, fragrance and parfum, is that they are sinkholes for hundreds of chemicals that don't have to be disclosed for proprietary reasons. So the companies can use fragrance and never tell you what that is. I think there are some safer synthetic fragrances that are coming out that are phthalate free, and that's a good direction to move. But I would, have people look for things that don't have either fragrance or parfum on the label. And then the other one that is a big deal for me with hair care products is ethoxylated ingredients. And this is like this huge category that it's just impossible as a consumer to keep track of. But, some examples would be things that have eth in them. So sodium lauryl sulfate is the ethoxylated version of sodium lauryl sulfate. Phenoxyethanol is a very common preservative that's a petroleum-based ethoxylated preservative. And the reason I don't like ethoxylates is because they are made with ethylene oxide, which is a carcinogen, but they can create a byproduct of something called 1,4-dioxane, which is a contaminant in our groundwater at this point and is pretty mutagenic to small aquatic species. And so it's just really, really bad for the world and the creatures we share it with. Yeah. I found two random studies in my paraben deep dive. One that showed high levels of paraben in random samples of wild boar bristles, and another that found high levels of parabens in bat guano. And so those were like little beacons to me, reminding me that we share this planet with a lot of other creatures, and we're doing a lot of harm to them.
Yeah. No, it's like akin to kind of opening up a fish, right, and seeing like 20 Bic lighters in there or something.
Yeah.
So just around your own, kind of some of your own personal protocols, because I will say you have lustrous hair.
It's all the silver that makes it shine. Yeah.
See, okay, well, that's just another reason to let yourself free, or be. But are there any particular protocols that seem that if people want to know, God, Sarah looks amazing. She looks vibrant and healthy. And I want to know what she does.
Yeah. So hair care wise, you mean, or hair and skin?
Hair and skin.
Mm-hmm. So hair care, my favorite brands are Josh Rosebrook and Inner Sense, and there's another brand called Evolve. I don't have any affiliation. I'm good friends with Josh just from the industry. But those are three brands that I find are, pretty great in terms of their ingredient decks. And so I use those regularly. And this is where I'm like, ugh, is this salesy sounding? But we recently launched a rosemary scalp oil, and I use a scalp oil several times a week. And that's just, rosemary has actually been studied and shown to have a similar efficacy to minoxidil, which is Rogaine, when used regularly at a certain concentration. Right. And so I just formulated the scalp oil based on the studies that I read about rosemary, and also pumpkin seed oil, which is also another effective ingredient. It's not going to turn my bald husband into a hair model, but it can really help improve scalp health and your hair health.
Okay.
So that's the hair piece. And then for my skincare, I use our black clay facial soap every day because it really helped heal my dermatitis. And, I alternate we have a mud cleanser that I use. But the black clay is sort of like my holy grail. And if you go on our website, there's like 1,000+ reviews from people who are like, seriously, I'd rather divorce my husband than not have this bar of soap because it just has saved so many faces.
No.
Yeah.
And maybe ruining some marriages. Maybe,
I hope not.
Yeah.
And then I use our Purely Simple face cream, which is sort of my answer to a lot of the dermatologically recommended brands. It's like, it is very simple, but it's just the most beautiful version of that simplicity. And I use our Lip Doctor every day, and then I use a sunscreen as well after my skincare routine. I use here's my favorite trick.
Okay.
All right, so to somebody who's really trying to decrease the number of chemicals with which their skin comes in contact in a day, I always remind people that 91% of the surface area of your skin is the neck down. Right? So if you can switch to a natural bar soap, for example, our Coffee Mint body soap just won Cosmopolitan's Best Body Bar of 2024. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So a natural bar soap and then body oil on wet skin. That's one of my favorite tricks because you are putting oil on skin that's sopping wet and you're creating a lotion of sorts. Which allows you to use body oil instead of using a product that's 70% water, which would be like a body lotion. Right. So it's a bit of a habit change for people, but once they do it, they usually
and then
pretty
just
psyched.
walk around naked.
And then you just walk around naked. I'm reviving sex lives across the country, or voyeurism maybe also. But anyway, so I'll use like a natural bar soap and a body oil. But that to me is like the fastest way. You just cleaned up 91% of your ingredients, and you should switch your laundry detergent. I love Molly's Suds and Branch Basics as two brands that just do a really great job. But if you do that, you've cleaned up a huge amount of your exposure to ingredients. And then the face stuff, and hair and mascara and makeup, you can layer in. But even just getting to that 91% is like such a huge accomplishment for so many people.
Yeah, that is great advice. I know you're a reluctant salesperson, so I will do the bidding. I'll do at least some prodding. For people that want to learn more about your products and try your products, where can they find you and Osmia in general? And what would you suggest is like a good place for people to start if they want to just wade into the shallow end of natural skincare?
So we're Osmia Skincare on all social platforms, and that's our website as well, osmiaskincare.com. There's a huge, an embarrassing number of blog posts that I've written over the years about all kinds of skin subjects. So, my hope is to be helpful to people who have eczema, who have dermatitis, who have acne, who are just dealing with various skin conditions. I've done a ton of research and a ton of writing about it. So our blog is sort of a rich resource for people. And we're in the LA area, we're at the Detox Market in Santa Monica and in Beverly Hills. But I think as far as a starting point, that picking one of our body bars and one of our body oils is like an amazing place to start. And then the black clay facial soap and Purely Simple face cream is like a 2-step facial care routine that works for the vast majority of skin types.
Great. Well, I know that it's tricky for you to sort of balance your kind of deep desire really to help people and to run an enterprise with a mission, and then to also wear that entrepreneurial, like that CEO hat. And I get it. I've been there for most of my adult life. I've been, a conscious entrepreneur, if you will. But I think you do it with incredible grace, and it's it's wonderful to listen and to hear you talk about these issues with really with such passion, and I think that's at the core of these kind of, I don't know what I kind of put Commune in this category as well. It's that they are really businesses of the soul. I mean, we hope that they work out. In some cases, we sort of need them to work out,
Right.
but that's not why we started it, or that's not really our motivating force every morning. And so, yeah, I take off my hat and I share your both the sort of high points and low points of what it's like to be an entrepreneur, and to do something that you truly believe in. So, I applaud you and I thank you. I hope that that you can really find a way within a very, very difficult marketplace to I guess scale sustainably is how to put it.
Yeah.
I've known, as we were talking about kind of before we got started, it's so difficult to scale a company and remain pure to its mission.
Absolutely.
And what's the kind of greatest challenge there for you as you kind of think about impacting more people with Osmia?
Yeah. I think, our business has ended up in a way being two arms. So the one side is more like clinical skincare solutions, right? So like either I just want to switch to a clean skincare routine, or hey, I've got dermatitis or eczema or whatever. So it's more of a problem solver. That side of our business, for the most part, is something I think we could scale pretty successfully. We work with partners on a couple products already, and we've got our processes dialed in a lot of them where we could hand a recipe to a partner and be like, okay, make 100,000 of these, right? Yeah. There's another side of our business that's super artisanal, and that part is not very scalable. Like, I hope that you'll come and make soap with us one day, because it's super cool and fun to watch and be part of, but it's not really a scalable thing. And it could be that, there will come a time when I need to either split it into two businesses, or I'm going to have to address it at some point. Right now, the beauty of the artisanal side of the business is still dear to me. And I think what we offer is special and different. But, like there's something called the craft series that we do, which is like basically seasonal soaps and body oils and body mousses. So I'm really trying to allow people to stay connected to the seasons through scent. And that's something that's just not really scalable. So I might have to make a hard call at some point about whether I'm going to lop off part of the business and try to get it into some bigger hands, and whether the artisanal stuff gets to live on.
Yeah. Well, you've been a remarkable steward. And I should mention that my wife has lured you into her labyrinth, also with Dr. Sarah Gottfried. And you guys were just up in Topanga at our humble retreat center, doing a 3-day event for a group of women, I think 35 women or so. And I'm hopeful that is a recurring theme, perhaps not on the same weekends where there's dance competitions.
I'll talk to Skylar about that.
But I'm hopeful that's going to recur, this summer and again in the fall. So, Sarah, thanks so much for coming on.
For having me. I appreciate being here.
Nice. Hey, thanks a lot for watching. If you enjoyed this video, then I think you'll love this one too.